Good afternoon. Bonjour, bienvenue, welcome to everyone. My name is Morag Humble. I'm the Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Advisor for the TAP EDM team. I work on as a specialist for gender equality and as well as a project director with Alinea International. I've been with Alinea for about 21 years and 20 years, I think. And I'll be your moderator today. So we've got a panel of speakers this afternoon who are all working as Canadian experts with the Technical Assistance Partnership Expert Deployment Mechanism. That's the TAP EDM project. And they are deployed to different countries around the world to help try and work with government partners in those countries to strengthen systems and processes in those government institutions, especially with attention to gender equality and social inclusion. So I wanted to start, especially since this week is National Reconciliation Week here in Canada, and this Saturday is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation on September 30th. I'd like to acknowledge that our teams are located across the lands now known as Canada, and they're the traditional lands of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people who have stewarded these lands throughout generations. And we respect and affirm the inherent treaty rights of all Indigenous people across this land and commit to walking a path of solidarity and a path of genuine reconciliation. TAP EDM commits to ensuring that our teams conduct their programming in a manner that delivers on the calls of the United Nations Declarations on Indigenous People. And we're striving to implement these values every day in our work in developing meaningful and inclusive relationships with local communities in Canada and with local communities and partners in the countries where we work around the world. Okay, I'll tell you a little bit about TAP EDM. The Technical Assistance Partnership Expert Deployment Mechanism is a 4-year, $18.75 million project funded by Global Affairs Canada that's implemented by Alinea International. And we provide short-term targeted technical assistance for periods up to 12 months to national government entities from eligible OECD DAC countries. And we work to enhance the capacity of national level institutions to manage policies and practices in a more gender responsive and inclusive way, promoting social, political, and economic opportunities in partner countries. And that all of these initiatives are aimed at also integrating and mainstreaming 3 cross-cutting themes in our project, which is gender equality and social inclusion, environment and climate action, and human rights and good governance. So the TAP EDM mechanism overall for the 4 years of the project is expected to provide over 200 Canadian professionals to support national government institutions through 75 or 80 technical assistance initiatives that are designed to address capacity gaps and bring about the changes desired by those government entities. So that's the project that we're working with. For our webinar today, we're focusing our discussion on how are we working and how is it to support countries in working to strengthen core central functions in government and to mainstream gender equality and social inclusion in those core central functions. So we're looking at some of the most powerful systems in government: planning systems, budgeting systems, procurement systems, human resource management systems, and policies and programs related to those systems. And we're trying we want to talk about with our experts here to get their experience in how are they going about the work, what kind of approaches are they using, why is it important to do the work that they're doing, and what kind of impact do they hope to have in this work. So we have a panel of 5 speakers today. We'll have a keynote address from our Canadian expert, Tracy Apol, and then we'll have 4 other speakers who are going to speak for a shorter period of time, but to talk about each of them, the way that they are working in their individual technical assistance initiatives. So I'd like to take the chance, we can take off the slide and just get each of the speakers briefly to introduce yourselves, and why don't I just go in the order that we'll be talking. So Tracy, why don't you start with a brief introduction, and we'll try and, guys, if you can keep it to 2 minutes, just to introduce yourself and what you're doing, and then we'll go back and you'll have longer to talk afterwards. Thanks.
So hello, everyone. My name is Tracy Apol. I'm located in Edmonton. It's Treaty 6 territory. I've been working on gender equality, gender mainstreaming for over 20 years. I have a master's degree in the promotion of gender equality from the Institute of Social Studies in The Hague. It's a real pleasure for me to be here. And just as part of the introduction, just to let you know, I have 3 children, 3 boys. My youngest is homesick, so you might hear coughing in the background. And my oldest goes to university, and he should be coming home soon. And I don't know if he remembers that I'm doing this, so he might peek his head in and say hi. So if you hear a male voice behind me, that is my son's. Just the joys of working from home. I think post-COVID, we're all quite used to that, but there might be a couple of interruptions. All right, thank you so much. And I look forward to chatting with you and hearing your questions at the end of the presentations. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be on this virtual stage with an amazing group of experts. There's just so much knowledge here. So it's a real honor and a privilege to be able to share this space. As I mentioned, I've been working in the area of gender equality for over 20 years. And, you know, before doing this talk, I actually went back to read my thesis. And, you know, I wrote my thesis about 20 years ago. And it's actually was a little bit disheartening because most of what I wrote 20 years ago still applies today. So despite the fact that we've been promoting gender equality for so many years, there's not a single country in the world that has achieved gender equality. It's a testament to the people, I think, also who are continuing to strive for gender equality and, you know, just not giving up at all. So in Canada's been promoting gender equality since around 1995 and is actually a leader in the promotion of gender equality globally. So in 1995, for those of you who are unaware, there was the 4th World Conference on Women that was held in Beijing, and this was a pivotal conference in the world of gender equality. It was at this conference where gender mainstreaming became one of the main strategy for how to implement gender equality. And the United Nations, they define gender equality like this. I'm just going to read this so I get it right, but it's a strategy for making women's and men's concerns and experiences an integral dimension of the design, the implementation, the monitoring, and evaluation of all policies and programs in all political, economic, and social spheres so that women and men benefit equally and equality is not perpetuated. The goal of gender mainstreaming is gender equality. And so that's gender mainstreaming. But before I go on, I also want to talk a little bit about what is gender equality, because there is so much confusion, even amongst gender experts, as to what is gender equality. I hear so often that gender equality is about treating men and women the same. I can assure you, gender equality is not about treating women and men the same. But I can also assure you that gender equality is not about treating women and men differently. CEDA, back in 1999, defined both of these things as gender equity. Gender equity is the process of being fair to women and men. And sometimes being fair is treating women and men the same. Sometimes We need to say we're all just people and we need to be treated the same, equal pay for equal work, as an example. But sometimes being fair is treating women and men differently. There might be historical reasons why women and men don't have the same experiences. There might be reasons why Indigenous people do not have the same experiences and the same level of equality as non-Indigenous people. And so we need to be treating people a little bit differently, for example, through affirmative action programs. Or I often, again, because I have children, I've used the education system as an example. Every child should have the right to education. But once that's treating them all the same, but once those children enter the classroom, they are all different and they have different learning needs. And so we need to treat them according to their needs. Both of those are equity. So what is equality? What exactly are we talking about when we talk about equality? Equality is removing the barrier. It's the end goal. It's when the different behaviors, the aspirations, the needs of women and men are considered, they're valued, and they're favored equally. Gender equality means that all human beings, regardless of their age, regardless of their race, regardless of their sex, are free to develop their personal abilities and make choices without limitations set by stereotypes, rigid gender roles, or prejudices. So if you can imagine those images that are used all of the time, where you've got the three images, and the first one, everybody's standing on the same box, and the next one, there's a tall person has one box, a medium-sized person has two boxes, and the short person has three boxes. And then there's a third image where the fence is removed. That third image is what we're looking for. That is the goal of gender mainstreaming. And that really is the goal of the Government of Canada. So the Government of Canada has the Feminist International Assistance Policy, where its core action area is to achieve gender equality. And right now, 95% of all government funding and international development is to be directed towards the promotion of gender equality. So that's just so that we're speaking the same language. What is gender equality? What is gender mainstreaming? And what is Canada's role in promoting gender equality? So specifically, Canada wants to eradicate poverty, build a more peaceful world, build a more inclusive world, and support greater prosperity. So those are kind of the four main goals of the Feminist International Assistance Policy. So how do these goals link to gender equality? So let's talk about building a more peaceful world. So what does building a more peaceful world have to do with achieving gender equality? So we know that there's conflict, we know there's war, we know there's unrest, and we know that these impact women and men differently. They impact the rich and the poor differently. They impact people of different races, different classes differently. The ways that people are impacted, it varies based on the context. So some harsh but real examples. In some conflicts in the past, HIV/AIDS was used as a weapon of war. And it was intentionally used against women with the hopes that women would get pregnant and that these women would then get HIV/AIDS, as would their children. And so it was a way to try to erase a specific group of people. It impacted women and men very differently. In general, we have the erosion of basic rights for women, the erosion of rights for the queer community, for people who are a part of the LGBTQ or two-spirited community. We see this often in situations where there's conflicts, where there's a lack of peace. Something else we see in the peace and conflict world is that women are largely excluded from the peace-building process. And yet we have all kinds of evidence that shows that when women are included in the peace-building process, the likelihood of peace being sustained for 2 years or more increases by 20%. The increase of peace lasting for 15 years or more goes up by 35% if women are included. So why do we continue to exclude women from peace processes? So that's one of the questions that Canada is. That's one of the things where Canada is saying, what can we do to get greater equality in those peace processes? Because we want to see results. We want to see lasting peace. Just switching page. In terms of economic benefits, so increasing prosperity in the world. Again, there's all kinds of data, there's all kinds of proof that show that greater equality is good for everyone. And so, for example, we know that if you increase equality in the workforce, it has the possibility of increasing GDP globally and in specific countries. And I've seen percentages, I've seen estimations anywhere from 9% up to 26% of a potential of increase in GDP by just having equality. And yet we don't have it. We continue to have a gender pay gap. And what does that mean? That means that women and men who are working in the exact same positions, or they're working in C-suite jobs, they're not getting paid the same. So on average, the gender pay gap is about 17%. So women make about 17% less than men in the same positions. Racialized women earn even less. And it is like this. There's a gender pay gap from entry-level positions all the way up to those C-suite positions. So again, we're going back to, we have all this proof, we have all this evidence that gender equality is good for everyone, it's good for society, but it's not happening. In addition to this, we need to remember that gender equality is a human rights issue. So we shouldn't even have to talk about the evidence. We're talking about people, and we're talking about people's lives. We're talking about people having the ability to live a life to their maximum potential, whatever that potential is. It should be a human rights issue. It should be obvious, but it is not happening. 20 years after writing my thesis, we still do not have any country in the world that has achieved gender equality. So let me just give you an example, a couple of examples of projects that I've been working on recently, and I think this is part of, you know, the key part of what I want to talk about today. So Canada is promoting gender equality around the world, but who is Canada to do that? Gender equality issues are different from country to country. So can Canada take its idea of what is gender equality and apply that in Afghanistan, apply that in Bolivia, in Mexico, in Thailand? And so how does Canada say, we promote gender equality, we're going to fund projects that promote gender equality, but at the same time, be cognizant of the local context, be cognizant of the realities in those particular places. And you know, personally, I think Canada does a great job of that. So while it has gender equality as this core value, this human right, you'll hear from the other panelists how it actually goes about implementing gender equality varies by country, varies by region, because the contexts vary. And that's one of the strengths of Canada's policy. So an example from a project that I was working on recently through the TAP EDM project was in Mexico. I was working with the Mexican Ministry of Finance, and they wanted to increase, their goal is to increase the number of women in leadership positions. So what does that mean? We go into Mexico and we found a couple of different things. One of them was this patriarchal structure. And so there was a study done by McKinsey. McKinsey went in and they asked Mexicans, in economic downturns, when there's high unemployment, who should have the right to education or to work, men or women? And the majority of people said men. If there's high unemployment, give jobs to men. And why is that? Because there's still this belief in the benevolent breadwinner. that the man is the breadwinner and he should be providing for the family in this benevolent manner. And so men are viewed as more needy and more needing and warranting higher level positions. The other thing that was really interesting was part of the colonial legacy. So in Mexico, they work some of the longest days in the world, for sure in the Western Hemisphere. And so they are working from about 7 o'clock in the morning until 9, 10 o'clock at night. So where does this come from? So they were colonized by Spain. Spain would work these long days, but they would take a 2, 3, 4 hour break in the middle for their meal time, spend time with families, have their siesta. That was adopted by Mexico, but now because of globalization, they're taking a 1 hour work break for lunch, but they're continuing to stay until those long, long hours. How is this impacting people? It's particularly impacting women and women who have children, because they cannot work those hours and be home to cook their children's supper, to take care of their supper if they have preschool children, to get them to and from daycares. And so you're seeing an incredible number of women leaving the workforce. Maura gave me a 2-minute warning. So I just want to very quickly share just one other quick project is I'm working on a project in Bolivia right now. Bolivia has a huge focus on their indigenous populations. And I think this is just a beautiful thing. So one of what they're looking at is, and what Canada is allowing them to explore, is how gender equality relates to their indigenous populations and how colonialism changed the idea of their organization of the indigenous societies. Before the Spanish arrived, the term indigenous didn't exist. And now we have this term indigenous. And what does even that term need in terms of subjugating people? So as we're going through doing training and gender-based analysis of their policies, we're unpacking the notion of indigenous people and what does that mean in Bolivia's context. So in short, Canada has their Feminist International Assistance Policy. They've been promoting gender equality since at least 1995, but it does so in a way that allows countries to work within their own contexts, within their own realities, where it has this universal idea of human rights and the dignity of the individual, but within the local context, so that initiatives, understanding of gender equality, how to achieve it is very localized. Anyway, so that's where I wanted to go. And again, now with the other speakers, you'll hear a little bit about their projects and a little bit of how Canada is localizing these concepts. Thank you very much.
And welcome, bonjour à tout le monde, bienvenue ici. My name is Lena Meyer, and I am a gender equality specialist. Like Tracy, I've been working in the human rights gender field for over 20 years now, many years at Global Affairs Canada. And I see some colleagues online from there. Hi, Manuel and others. Thank you for joining. So in this particular project, I'm working on GBA Plus with the South African government. And I know Tracy will speak to some elements of this work, and I will also be elaborating on that in terms of my experience adopting the GBA Plus to the government of South Africa. So really looking forward to the discussion. Thanks so much. And I'll try to keep to my 10 minutes, but like Tracy, sometimes I talk fast to try to squeeze it all in. So I'll try not to do that. If I talk too quickly and the translators can't keep up, please do let me know. But first, a shout out to Tracy. I was going to put it at the end, but I want to make sure I get it in there. One nice thing about collaborating on the TAP project is, sharing knowledge amongst the experts. And Dimitra, who I don't know if she's on this call, but she was helping me out, and she said, "Oh, you're doing GBA Plus. Tracy has done that before. Why don't I connect you two?" And so we've had a couple calls, and it's been really nice to learn from her experiences in the Latin American context and see what I can apply, the salient points for the South African context. So it's been really nice to have that. So thanks, Tracy, for being available for that. And that's been a nice sort of side benefit to this program. But to sort of give a very, very brief summary of my ask on the TAP, it's very much the South African context GBA Plus is Gender-Based Analysis Plus. And basically, it's a training program that's online, self-paced. I did it when I worked at GAC. In fact, I remember being there at the genesis of this. And originally, the Canadian government put GBA, Gender-Based Analysis Plus, in place for civil servants across government to understand gender implications and bring a gender lens to their work. It then became basically open source. So it went beyond the government, is now available for anyone, any member of the public anywhere in the world to access online. And I'm assuming that's how the South African government heard about the program. I don't know the exact genesis, but basically what's nice is the demand to have a version of GBA Plus for South African public servants came from South Africa, right? So that's, I'm getting ahead of myself, but that's one thing that I really like about this piece of work. But yes, just for basic understanding, it's a small, short online course that is available to anyone. And in this case, the South African government said, we'd love to have something like this for our public service. So my role was to work on adapting the Canadian course made for Canadians with very, very Canadian references and case studies and examples, and modify it so it's something that's salient and relevant to the lived experiences of South Africans, and that will be applicable and useful to South African civil servants as they go about their work, and especially those who don't focus on gender equality. That's really the idea of this. It's meant to be applicable to those across the public sector. So that was the ask. What I will do is a bit of a sort of a presentation version of the praise sandwich. So I'll start with the positives. I'll go into some of the challenges, and then I'll end with the positives as well. Oh yeah, and just one thing to mention, that WAGE, so Canada's a gender equality department, this is still very much used by them, and they're actually in a process right now of updating the GBA Plus so that it's even more contextually salient, relevant, current, really putting a focus on that intersectionality piece, the First Nations piece, etc. So there will be a newer version, at least in Canada, of GBA Plus soon, and WAGE is working on that. And of course, I've been in touch with WAGE throughout this as well. So in terms of the positives, the progress, I mean, the first is to say a thank you to WAGE, actually, because they were very happy to bequeath the intellectual property rights and the transcript of the course to us, specifically just for this one purpose. And that was really helpful, because then we had kind of carte blanche to make the changes we wanted to, and to work with the South African government on that. The GBA Plus, another positive, I think remains very robust. As I mentioned, it's being updated, but I think there's a lot still that's very relevant and useful, especially to civil servants. And then the other real boon, I think, which I just mentioned, is that the request for this training came from the South Africans themselves. And I think that adds a lot of sort of currency and weight to the work we're doing. I also feel like there's a need for this work in South Africa. As we know, it's a country that has so many amazing things and quite a progressive constitution, but of course, still many challenges when it comes to gender equality. And when I was there and speaking to some of the consultants and people who put together some of the other gender courses for the government, I really learned that this course would really provide complementarity to what already exists. There's quite a long, hefty 4-day gender mainstreaming course that currently exists. And apparently there was a GBA element to that. There was a gender-based analysis element to that course, but in efforts to shave that course down, it sort of fell off the 4-day part. So when I mentioned that we were doing this, they said that could really provide complementarity. So that's nice, because it's nice to hear that we're bequeathing and working on something that is actually of use and complements existing training on gender. So those are some of the positives. One other positive is there's a strong tech aspect to this work. And part of it was looking at the substantive review of the script, and part of it was trying to understand from a technological perspective, where could this course reside, which government department, what technology is needed. And one really nice finding, we've had some tech challenges, which I'll get to, was you can get great value for money in South Africa. So very, very high capacity people who bid. We put out a tender for this tech piece, and we got great capacity for very good value for money, probably a quarter or a fifth or even less of what we'd anticipated the price to be. So that's been a great positive. In terms of some of the challenges, not unique to South Africa, of course, but the DWYPD, the Department for Women, Youth, and Persons with Disabilities, which is the main gender department there, just like every gender department all over the world, is overstretched, underfunded, understaffed. So one of the principal challenges has really been, even though there's been political will, the staff often are just so overwhelmed with so many competing demands that they just haven't had time to devote as much time as I think they would have liked to this. And that has created sort of a real, it's meant that project has been elongated and drawn out for quite a long time, because there's just been a lot of waiting until there was time for them to devote some energy to this. So that is not unique to South Africa, but that's definitely been a challenge. Again, I remember this from my days at GAC, so very, very much not unique to South Africa as well. But when we were discussing where the projects should reside, where the training should reside, and who had the technical capacity, there was a bit of reticence, a bit of turf war perhaps between government departments, which we see everywhere in terms of wanting to maintain ownership. The gender department, the DWYPD, wanted to really have full ownership, but they actually lacked the capacity technologically to host it. So, again, sort of, we see this everywhere, some vying for ownership and attention amongst government departments, and that's been very much our reality too. But again, as a former civil servant for Canada, this is definitely not unique to South Africa. This is a universal challenge, I think, the time-limited nature of so many of these assignments and projects. It's hard to, as I said, this project has been elongated, but even with that, we probably don't have enough time. And again, there's very real challenges in South Africa of electricity, connectivity, load sharing, etc. Those are very still real challenges to our work and to the work of the civil servants in the gender department. Speaking of time challenges, I have just had my 2-minute warning from Morag, so very timely, Morag. I will just end with 2 more thoughts in terms of zooming out and sort of ending on the positive as well. I do feel like overall, though there have been some challenges, as I said, with the tech aspect and the capacity and time of the civil servants to devote to this, I do think that the fact that there was a demand is such a positive. And as Tracy has alluded to, really the implementation piece is going to be the real challenge. If civil servants do take this course and there is an uptake, how do they then make sure that they can make this a reality in their work? And that, frankly, will involve even more time and effort, guidance, time, patience, picking a few wins over all of them, and support. So that's really, this is just the baby challenge. The real challenge is in the implementation and in the sustainability for this. Because we haven't found a department that it can reside in yet, we are temporarily hiring a private company to host it. But that's obviously not a sustainable solution for the government. So how do we think about sustainability for this training going forward? I do feel like this piece of work and the script that we will produce for South Africa, I do feel like there are so many unknowns in terms of political will, the vagaries of politics, the staff, departmental changes, all of those things all come to play. But I do feel strongly that I think the course will not be jeopardized by those things. I think no matter what government comes into power and what civil servants come and go from the department, I do feel like this course will hold its own. And so on that piece, in terms of sustainability, I take great hope. But I will end there in the interest of time, 10 minutes and 8 seconds on the dot. And back over to you, Morag. And I look forward to your questions. Merci beaucoup. Et les questions en français et en anglais, both work for me. Thank you.
Laura St. Lawrence. I worked 15 years in international corporations on the funds for 5 or 6 years in Latin America. And since 2005, I work with governments and private enterprises to put in place supply and service responsible purchases with the Peruvian government.
I will speak in French. So maybe to start, I'm going to explain to you the work that I do. I'm not specifically a person who is specialized in the gender equity and equality. I'm more specialized in how to include sustainability in the procurement. And I help currently the Peruvian government, for the Peruvian government to set in place tools, operational tools that aims to have a better and more accountable procurement. What about accountable procurement? As a lot of things pertaining to sustainability, it covers really various aspects that are quite different. So government and the administration and public administration buy huge quantities of goods and services like construction equipment, services, insurance, cleaning, and the government buys a lot, and the Peruvian government purchases more than $5 million US. Those are important levers to participate in the social economic development within a territory. So the sustainable procurement is to ensure that the product, the service of a government and bought by the government should have the least impact on the environment and should participate to the development, economic development. When it comes to the social development, we need to ensure that monitoring is set in place. So the government is going to give a contract to providers, but those must develop economically developed territories in order to provide an access to excluded service providers and other vulnerable parties. So in these vulnerable parties are entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs who are traditionally excluded by population, who do not have access to a market. We can have other models of companies, like private companies, like social economic companies, who are all excluded. So there is all these economic actors who are most of the time dark and unknown into a territory and to which we are going to give them an access to public procurement. So when we arrive about a sustainable procurement, that's what we need to convince. We need to convince the political, the decision makers, and all the managers of all the units that's purchased throughout the country, in addition to the thousands of purchasers who every day sell and have procurement. So it is a complex mechanism that goes from top down. And today, what we are looking for and we're trying to do, if we review the accessibility of women to public procurement and the equality, gender equality, the first thing that we need to do as part of our approach with the government of Peru is to make them understand the added value of procurement in order to give this access to all these populations. So we raise awareness. First of all, we raise awareness. So the government of Peru have started for years, let's say 10 years ago, to work the environment side of the things. But the other components, social, economic, are ignored, or we are just starting right now with the project, with the Canadian project. So the first thing is, first of all, to raise awareness about those topics and to highlight how their purchasing power can contribute. And we can find it in all the directives and all the guidelines. And we ask ourselves, what are the legal pathways in the laws, in the standards that can be extracted in order to encompass in the purchasing, in the procurement. So we needed, first of all, to read through to see what are the pathways, and after that to work with the people who are in the procurement in order to modify those policies. So it is another part of the work that we have been doing. I'm not alone on this project. I am here in Canada. I go 1 week to Peru simply in order for consultation. And there is a Peruvian consultant who is on the ground, who is helping me to identify those policies and those standards. So the big chunk of the work, if I keep in the same vein, is to ensure that the people with whom we work, who are going to set in place or to set in place the program, is to understand the purchasing power and to see how their purchasing power influence the procurement. And the second objective is to see how how, while having such a practices that ensure equality, gender equality to equality, those equality doesn't only improve the access of women and provide more equality, but they favor also a better financial health for companies throughout the country, because we have some data to which they exist, and that for Latin America that highlight that companies where women have more access to the board, to management process, those companies are more performant financially, and they're even rates, their figures that are very advantageous. So we are going to present that to the decision makers because it will motivate them in order to implement everything. So somehow that's how we work, as that's what we are doing right now. So we are setting in place a consultation mechanism to change the mind of people and how to see how they are. So in order to end what we are doing when it comes to this, you have to understand that our objective is to understand how women on the ground could be able to companies, and what are the market analysis, what are the data we have, and that's only to say you should have criteria that target gender equality, but in such sector for those products which economic sector has more possibilities to have a better response in the market, and how we can implement a more sustainable, more implementing those sustainable. So in a nutshell, that's what we are doing in Peru. The biggest challenge, you will understand that we have a lot of stakes that needs to be taken into consideration. We need to be very targeted. We are only in the beginning of the market, on the beginning of the project, and so I will stop here. I don't know how long how long I stayed, but I can come back to you if we have any questions.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here. I'm Michelle Fillon. I'm a specialist in public administration, especially budgeting in Quebec, with a finance minister since in 2000, Pauline Marois, and a little bit everywhere in the world, Asia, Latin America, Africa. And in the last few years, since 2007, I'm working the budget, the aspects of budgeting that is sensible to gender equality. I am working with Tunisia, and management by objective is how we are functioning.
Thank you very much, Morag, and you are here giving me the floor to talk about the former Prime Minister of Quebec was saying that the first person who can read the budget is the whole reading the state with the beer, with the bread and the butter. So the budget is telling us what we are doing. First of all, I would like to hail the people who are here. I'm not talking everyone, but I would like to greet the people who are coming from Mongolia, people coming from Amazonia, from Peru, not only Anne-Marie, who is Peruvian for a few weeks, but I can recognize other people from Peru, from Colombia, from Venezuela. I recognize also people from Central Africa and Western Africa. So I would like to greet you all. It's a great pleasure to see you. I can see IT from Haiti, the Ministry of Women from Haiti. So here, 10 minutes, too much for me. So I'm going to contain myself in 10 minutes and talk about 6 items. The first one, the main, the core, is the anchorage. Talking about budget that is sensitive to the gender is to be anchored into the budget. So in my efforts since 2007 is to address to budget people, the accountants, people who are financial people, who are not specifically who love the social analysis. So I am anchoring myself, entrenching myself in a document. It is the PEFA gender, POF gender. In 2020, this institution, the PEFA, which is based in Washington, that is made of the World Bank and the IMF, the Ministry of Finance of Denmark, of the Luxembourg, and others. So they decided to give to the analysis of the countries, the public finance, to give them a guide. And the objective is to assess the quality of the budget choices at the light of the equity, the mainstreaming. So it is my anchorage. And then with this encourage that is shared with my partners locally, and they were very happy to know that I have a budget encourage my partners locally is the central unit of the budget of management per objective, and it is located, this central unit is based at the Ministry of Finance. It is under the Ministry of Finance, and it is just management by objective that are in charge of the reform of the budget. They get them close to the income perceived and the result as perceived by the population. So this institution did a lot of work. They worked on the introduction of the gender sensitive budget. We made a presentation in August, and they worked on the nomenclature. That means how to budget. And then tested this. They trained the groups. They trained focal points and groups around the focal point. So in Tunisia, we have a well-organized group that is quite solid. Just to be sure, I'm coming to my third item, a guide. I must produce a guide, a practical guide on gender sensitive budgets. I must to ensure each stakeholders, we're talking about thousands, those 1,000 stakeholders must take this guide and make those budget decisions while taking into consideration the equities or gender equity that exists in them. It's such a strong guide is an instrument that is at the same level as a ministry decree, but everyone has a guide on their office, and they know at the page 18 or 22 you have the response to their questions. They're going to consult the guide more than the decree or the order, ministerial order. So thanks to the program, the one that brought us all today here, and thanks to this program, we are able to go even further in the civil servants, and to the objective is for them to adopt the measures, at least to reduce the gap between the services provided to the gender between men, women, girls, and boys. This guide, we needed to choose an entry point. How could we speak to the budget and financial people? We made the choice with the central unit. We decided to go through the budget cycle. We had 4 main steps, and we discussed these 4 steps that are done on concrete actions. So first of all, we draft. If you are a civil servant in a far away region and you miss to make a budget proposal, what you should do tomorrow morning to include gender equality or gender mainstreaming. We have 5 or 6 actions that needs to be implemented for each state. Or I'm talking about the drafting, approval of the budget, implementation of the budget with a follow-up, and finally the oversight and the oversight and the follow-up. So every time we do the same cycle. So we adopted this, and then we took this. So the old guide, we have 30 actions that I validated with the people on the ground. We had a meeting last Monday in Tunisia, and with the focal points, with the administrators, with the Ministry of Finance, with directors, and the objective is to see with them if they were happy, if they had questions, if they had concerns. And of course, we had kind of a coming back, kind of an exchange, but we were on the forefront, and we wanted them to give the gender. I have 2 points. Tell what to say. So the analysis or comparing analysis
that have integrated, I'm going to integrate it in the practical guide. And I also added another tool, the approach by you might the capacity, if I had to franchise it, excuse me, it's an approach from the 80s, Mr. Sen, S-E-N. It's what inspired our approach, our Canadian approach. So I am using that content, and I try to improve the social analysis and equality amongst people. I end with one thing: the advantage of this program to cast in the planet Canadian experts, Quebecois, Quebecers, is that we have much experience, not only a Canadian experience or a Quebec experience. In my situation, I spoke to people from Mongolia's. That person is a collaborator that I had in Mongolia when I was trying to do this in her country. So I take experience, extraordinary experience. We have 36 affirmative action in all spaces. It took 3 years, but we managed to do it. And now it's the National Administrative School, which is teaching the system to the people in Mongolia. Also, experience I got in Burkina Faso with parliamentarians. I would say that beyond the projection of the Canadian experience and the Quebec experience elsewhere, it's the knowledge, our experts, our individual personalities that comes from our culture. You've heard everyone mention the non-ceded territory, etc. And being open, we share this everywhere we go, and we bring people to each and other to bring what they have to offer in their own way. I spoke of René Lévesque. He started by quoting a singer. Everybody comes with his tool, his stone to build his own country. Gilles Vigneault. Thank you for your attention.
My name is Carolyn Tanner. I'm coming to you from Ottawa, Ontario, and the unceded, unsurrendered territories of the Algonquin peoples. My background is that I'm a human rights lawyer, and I've worked in that capacity supporting governments in East Timor, Nepal, Uganda, and most recently through this initiative in Thailand. And my area of expertise is really around human rights and using human rights as a leverage and a tool to create equity, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace. And I look forward to our conversation today. Thanks very much, Morag. It's really nice to be here today. And it's nice to be here because I'm fresh on my arrival back from Thailand. I just spent a week last week working with the Department of Rights and Liberties Protection within the Ministry of Justice to really explore and examine how they can create an action plan to promote equality and inclusion for members of the LGBTQI+ community in their workforce. And I think this is really an important element to be bringing to discussions around gender equality, because I think when we're talking about gender equality, we need to be moving away from a binary discussion of gender, of it being male and female. And it's very important to be including recognition of protections and work against discrimination and towards equality for people because of their gender identity, because of their gender expression, or because of sex characteristics. So this was a really important and interesting initiative. And I think it's particularly interesting because in my view, Canada is one of the leaders in terms of the legislative framework that we have to protect people's gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, and sex characteristics from discrimination. So from our charter to the Canadian Code of Human Rights to the Ontario Human Rights Code, all of these things very specifically enumerate and provide protection from discrimination based on sex, and specifically go on to expand that includes gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation. And our courts have reinforced that. So I think when we go to other contexts, we really go from a place of a country, Canada, that has taken and applied best practices and best human rights practices in terms of protections for people who are gender diverse. And I think it's really great to be able to bring that to a different context. So this is also particularly exciting. And I think what's really positive is that it was demand driven. So it's in response to a request from the government in Thailand, which means there's really political will to try to move this. And what's different in Thailand from Canada is that their legislative framework doesn't provide the same strength of protections. So it's really about looking at the context that they have there, capitalizing on the political will that exists within the Department of Rights and Liberties Protection in the Ministry of Justice, and figuring out a way forward that will work within their context, but that will also provide maximum benefit and be able to leverage the engagement for maximum sustainability over time. So essentially, the approach that I took was to take a human rights-based approach to the work. And for me, a human rights-based approach is really looking at equality and non-discrimination, looking at participation and inclusion, and accountability and transparency. So it was really looking at the processes that exist within the Department of Rights and Liberties and examining them through those lenses. And I think what's interesting is the discussion in Canada around, I'll call it idea work, so inclusion, diversity, equity, accessibility. The discussion around that is really quite advanced. But I think what is really nice in the discussion is a very simple kind of picture of three intersecting circles in a Venn diagram where you have equity in one circle, and you have diversity in another circle, and you have inclusion in another circle. And where all three of those intersect, you achieve belonging. And belonging is really what the application of human rights principles is all about. It's about affording each person dignity, and each person respect, and each person the ability to engage in the workforce in a way where they don't experience discrimination and they ultimately experience belonging. So my approach to the work was to look at it from an equity perspective. And for me, equity is about the rules we put in place to create an equal playing field for people. And I think Tracy spoke about this a little bit earlier, right? So it's about putting in place rules that might intentionally remove barriers that some people might experience because of their identity, because of their gender expression, because of their gender identity, because of their sex characteristics. And then if we look at diversity, it's a fact. So it's about looking at whether or not we currently have a diverse workforce. And by a diverse workforce, I mean looking at things like, do we have a diversity of experiences, a diversity of identities, and a diversity of people within the workforce? And then we look at inclusion, and inclusion is really about the action. So what actions is the organization taking to create a space for people to actively engage and actively have a voice and actively be included in decisions that impact on them and the greater environment? So we might have equity and diversity together, but without inclusion, without an action to intentionally include people in the process, we're not achieving belonging. And we might have inclusion and we might have diversity, but without rules that ensure that the voice can get to the table, we're not achieving belonging. We might have rules and we might have actions, but without diverse voices at the table, we're not getting a diversity of perspectives influencing how we achieve belonging. So really, when I was working with my colleagues at the Ministry of Justice, I brought that perspective in, and we looked at their systems. We looked at currently directives that they have in writing. We looked at practices they have in place. We looked at ways that we might be able to try to identify, get a snapshot of the existing diversity of their workforce. And we tried to examine and identify what barriers might be in place currently that we could sort of look to overcome. And we did that a few ways. I think one of the principal concepts of moving forward with work like this is to really ensure that the people who are most impacted have a voice. So together with my colleagues at the Ministry of Justice, we set up a meeting where employees who identified as members of the LGBTQI+ community could come in and share their experiences. And they did that, and they were quite open. But I also recognize that within an employment setting, it's difficult to be really open. So we also looked at existing research from the World Bank and from UNDP that indicated that there is a perception amongst the workforce in Thailand that members of the LGBTQI+ community do experience discrimination, and in particular, members of the transgender community. So I thought that was interesting. And then to try to get a more open perspective, we also went and met with civil society organizations that are working particularly on matters of advancement for rights and equality for members of the LGBTQI+ community, and we heard their perspectives. And right now we're in the process of pulling together those perspectives, looking at the barriers that were identified, looking at existing practices, and identifying concrete changes that can be made by the Ministry of Justice now, in the medium term and in the long term, to kind of promote and improve inclusion within the workplace. And I should have said this right at the start. In fact, within that department at the Ministry of Justice, there is an amazing sense of social inclusion, but it's not protected in writing. It's not protected by formal directives. It's not protected by the legislative framework, and it relies very much on individual personalities of people in management. So the question is really, how do we preserve that culture and ensure its sustainability over time? And the goal for the Department of Rights and Liberties Protection is really to model best practice in their department, and then have that practice be measured and monitored over time. So that's how we're getting into the transparency and accountability piece. And then have it rolled out to the subnational government and to other departments in other ministries who see how the positive impact it's having. And this is really nice because the Department of Rights and Liberties Protection currently has responsibility for having written and just recently launched the second National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, which specifically talks about the business community taking steps against discrimination based on sex and based on gender identity. And then it also had responsibility for launching recently the 5th National Action Plan on Human Rights in general. So they really are thought leaders within the country, and I think it's a great opportunity for them to model best practice. It has enormous potential impact moving forward. And I think some of that impact is to really kind of, from the bottom up, push legislation and push the government to take a more intentional view of anti-discrimination laws and a more intentional interpretation of the word sex in Thai, to include, as Canada does, gender identity, gender expression, and sex characteristics. So one thing we are doing with the department is encouraging them to define the Thai word for sex, to specifically say this includes, our interpretation of this includes protection from discrimination based on gender identity, and then use a definition of what that is because it's not a familiar term in Thailand, gender expression, and sex characteristics. And what that does is it starts modeling a uniform and expansive approach to protections and ensuring that the framework that they're applying in their day-to-day work models what could be done in other places. It's also an interesting initiative because this department has the mandate to comment on revisions to laws that are being adjusted or amended within the Thai government, and it also has the mandate to implement new laws. So we're working with the legal department as well to develop some guidelines for them and priorities for advocacy, so that the advocacy they're doing from the inside out will also be promoting a wider change across the government. I don't really have a lot more to add right here. I think it's important to acknowledge that an action plan is just a plan, right? It's not something that is done. It's more like a promise.
It's a starting point, not an ending point.
Right. So the real challenge here is to ensure that what I'm proposing isn't best practice in Canada, but is something that's really feasible and possible in the Thai context, and is something that is realistic. And I think we can aim for perfection, but the goal isn't really to have something that is aspirational, but more to have something that is practical and guided by Canadian experience. And I think part of that is also interpreting and anticipating barriers that may be put up against the action plan, and helping the national government to anticipate how they can respond to that. And one really useful way really was to talk to them about the competing rights framework that the Ontario Human Rights Code and the Ontario Human Rights Commission has used to kind of navigate that space when people start to push back against equality based on gender identity and gender expression because, for example, of religious beliefs. And it's about giving them a framework to be able to navigate those types of conversations so that they can very carefully get to a place where they're able to back up and justify why it's so very important to be fighting for gender equality, not just for men and women, but for gender diverse people across the country.
We have had quite a few questions through the chat, so I'm going to go directly into there. I do think, I do want to highlight a couple of things from what Carolyn said that I think are really important in terms of, sustainability and long-term action. And one is about the importance of modeling. Like people need examples of change. They need to see it in action. They need to understand what would this look like if I was to do it. And so, starting with one department that can model something from other departments, that can be really a powerful tool. And also another powerful tool from a sustainability perspective, even though we're working on quite short initiatives, is engaging civil society organizations as partners with governments, and that they can help to generate that ongoing, all these initiatives were started with a demand-based request from the national government entity. But in order to help the national government entity to continue to act after the TA is provided, having civil society organizations also demanding, that this action be implemented, that this work continue, I think can be a powerful tool for sustaining change. So I think that I want to go back. We had a question early on from Emmanuel Trepanier, who was raising the point that, technical assistance is a different kind of approach in international development work compared to more traditional community development projects. There's different spheres of influence, different stakeholders, different timeframes, that kind of thing. And he's interested in knowing whether that changes the way that you conceive the gender impact that you can have as a technical assistance provider, and what kinds of practical implications does that have, or should that have, in how donors like Global Affairs Canada should review requests for technical assistance interventions, and how implementing partners like Alinea should define and monitor and measure gender equality results. So I'm going to ask if any of the panelists have a perspective on that question that was asked by Emmanuel. Tracy, go ahead.
Thanks. I couldn't find the little hand icon, so I'm using my own hand. Yeah, no, I think that's a fabulous question. I'm actually not sure if Emmanuel is here anymore in the room or if he had to go, but I think first of all, the first point, if I'm understanding the question, is that I think gender equality is gender equality. I don't think it matters if we're doing community development or we're doing a technical assistance. There's inequality at the community level. There's inequalities within governments, within organizations, who we're working for and who we're working with. It's still about promoting gender equality. It's about identifying barriers. It's identifying what is preventing individuals from being the best person that they can be, and removing them, whether that's at the policy level, whether that's at the community level. It's really all about all the same thing, I think. The other thing that I just wanted to address is, he talks about how should we review proposals? How should Global Affairs Canada review proposals? I think that's a really great question, because it really depends. Is it a unsolicited proposal, or is it one where Global Affairs Canada is asking for proposals to come forward? And I think you're going to need to take the step back before even reviewing the proposals. It's how those proposals are being received and how they're being asked for. For example, one of the things in the proposals that I've seen from Global Affairs Canada, they often have intermediate objective or outcomes already defined. Okay, intermediate outcomes are those that define the behavioral change that needs to happen. And one of the things that I've seen that's really challenging then is, in different contexts, there's different behaviors that need to change. And so how to take that solicited proposal and put it into the local context. Because if you're saying these are the behaviors that we want to change, and you're getting a proposal that's coming from Afghanistan and you're getting a proposal that's coming from Peru, they're going to be very different proposals. And maybe those behaviors that have been predefined aren't actually the correct ones. If it is an unsolicited proposal, you really need to look at, do they understand what is gender equality? Do they understand what is gender equity? Are they really striving to dismantle the current power structures that exist and achieve equality? Or is it about looking at how policy needs to think about treating people the same or treating people differently and really focusing on equity? So when you're reviewing the proposals, I think you have to understand the local context that this proposal is coming from, and then look at what is really trying to be achieved at that ultimate level, that real equality level, that dismantling of current power structures, the intermediate level about equity-focused intervention. So understand the local context and understand what is trying to be achieved.
Thanks, Tracy. And if we were thinking more about proposals for technical assistance, I think one of the key things that's important to consider in looking at in evaluating proposals for technical assistance is really to focus on what's achievable and what's practical, and not recognizing that the kind of work that technical assistance providers do, you're advising, you're providing advice that government entities then have to do something with. So there's a limited amount that can be done by a technical assistance provider. So to be able to really try and define what's achievable, and to ensure that the orientation is very practical rather than theoretical, because technical assistance is such a short-term time frame in relation to, as you noted, Emmanuel, to other development initiatives. There was a question from Sunita Bisan that I think I'm going to direct to Anne-Marie. She was asking about if human rights-based approaches in gender can also be used in relation to environmental governance, and what kinds of, what perspective would you give on that? Thanks.
I found the question quite interesting, I must say. I cannot say that I have seen very specific needs. So how are the environmental impacts? The environment impact are this different from woman and man? That's what the question is about. So having to go through this analysis when it comes to sustainable development in countries where we intervene, I didn't know that. But I wanted to go back on the topic pertaining to the importance of the participation of the external stakeholders in order to consult civil society, as Caroline spoke about. And that goes back to this question. And I know that in all the steps we do when we work on accountable procurement, when we talk about social environmental groups, the civil society actors, the economic actors who are concerned by the policy must be involved in the consultation, because we need how the procurement should allow to meet their reality, to cater for their needs. When we talk about accountable procurement, it is very important to consult everyone in Canada. We have accountable procurement measure that allows House of Quebec evolve when it comes to accountable procurement, and the consultation of the stakeholders is one of the important component, because if we don't consult the external internal stakeholders, we are missing information in order to see how to implement and develop policies. So it is even more as part of the work that we are doing with the Peruvian government, and in order to be able to implement the policies, if we don't consult the real economic actors regarding the potential that represents the procurement, we are missing a big chunk of information to see how we are going to structure what we do. But even our government stakeholders, the government stakeholders who want to raise awareness too, will miss information regarding the reality and to which they need to work in order to change the reality. That's what I wanted to say. That's a little bit kind of a countered response to consult and to set in place consultation processes that are efficient of the environment, social and economic stakeholders within the territory. That's how we can identify the stakes and the impact that the policies can have in a different impact on men and women. I don't have it for environment and sustainable procurement. Accountable procurement. Maybe my colleague Michelle has more information regarding the gender assessment. I don't know.
Thanks. You know, unfortunately we're running out of time, so I'm sorry that I'm not going to be able to get through all of the questions that we had. I would like to encourage people to check in to the TAP EDM website, which Gabrielle will put up on the screen, I think at the end, and also please, if you can share your thoughts in using the Zoom poll that's just appeared. You can share your reactions to the webinar. But if people want to find out more, people were asking about whether we had more examples of how some of these things were being done with African governments. You can see all of the TAP EDM technical assistance initiatives are highlighted on our website, which is www.tap-pat.com. Is it .com or .ca? Sorry. And you'll be able to link things there. I would like specifically to give some thanks, first of all, to our panelists for sharing their experiences. And Gabrielle put the website .ca, the website, in the chat for me. Thank you. So check it out from there. I'd like to thank all the panelists for their thoughts today, and I would really like to thank, even beyond that, Global Affairs Canada for the project itself, Global Affairs Canada as the funder, and also the GAC and our colleagues at the Technical Assistance Partnership Hub did a lot of work to promote this webinar, and so did our colleagues and friends at the Canadian Network for Women's and Children's Health, CanWatch. So I'd like to offer thanks to both of those groups, and thanks to our interpreters today, Nouran Atmani and Jocelyn Marchand, who did a fantastic job to keep you all in the right language. And thanks to everybody for joining. We've had such a great group of registrants from around the world, and it's been really fantastic to have you here. And so please look at our website and follow TAP on social media. You can follow Alinea International on our socials as well. And please hope people were able to respond to the Zoom poll that came up. And with that, I think I'll just thank you all and encourage you to come again to participate in future events. We should have a future event to talk more about the challenges of some of this work, because that was a couple of questions around, how do you deal with some of these challenges? And I think that it is challenging work to provide technical assistance in a short-term context. I think we can have an important impact. I think we can really help governments because these are changes that they want to make. We can really help them to move the needle towards more gender equality, more social inclusion, consistently with the goals of Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy. And we will continue at TAP EDM to try and do that. And I hope that you will continue to support us in this work. So thanks very much.